Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. Trump issues deadline for Hamas Gaza Flotilla incident sparks global reaction. Multiple events emerge globally. Russia intensifies space operations. Trump secures Qatar security agreement. France investigates Russian tanker. India and China re-establish flights. Madagascar faces political enemy and activists. Abducted in Uganda. Ladakh experiences unrest. Cuba's tourism struggles. Riyadh comedy festival attracts criticism. Trump demands ruling party faces leadership. Trump declares war on drug cartels. As hostage shares trauma and resilience. Trump sets Sunday deadline for Hamas to accept Gaza deal, warning all hell if they don't. Donald Trump has issued a firm ultimatum to Hamas, setting a Sunday evening deadline of 6:00 p.m. Washington time for the group to accept his proposed Gaza peace plan. This follows Trump's initial announcement of the 20-point plan alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday, and a subsequent 3 to 4 day window given for a response. The plan, which includes an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages living and deceased in exchange for hundreds of detained Gazans, and a redevelopment plan for Gaza, has been met with cautious optimism by some international leaders. Communication between Hamas' political wing in Qatar and its military leaders in Gaza has been halting, with Trump expressing impatience for a definitive response. He highlighted that the details of the plan are known globally, emphasizing its potential to achieve lasting peace in the Middle East. Trump has repeatedly stated his intention to halt the violence and bloodshed, prioritizing the release of hostages. The plan involves a complete decommissioning of Hamas infrastructure, monitored by independent observers, and prohibits the group's future role in governing Gaza. In exchange, Hamas members would be granted amnesty upon committing to peaceful coexistence and disarmament. The proposal also includes the release of 250 Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences and 700 detained Palestinians. Following the plan's unveiling, Israel agreed to the framework, and Trump has repeatedly stated his belief in its potential. The plan envisions a gradual Israeli withdrawal, with an international stabilization force, ISF led by Arab partners assuming security responsibilities. A Palestinian committee, overseen by an international body called the Board of Peace, would temporarily govern Gaza, eventually transitioning to a reformed Palestinian Authority. Trump has urged innocent Palestinians to relocate to safer areas of Gaza during the siege, promising care from those awaiting to assist. The plan seeks to establish a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. The situation remains fluid, with ongoing discussions between Hamas and mediators, and Israel's continued military operations in Gaza City. The conflict has resulted in widespread devastation and a significant loss of life, with over 66,000 Palestinians killed according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The Gaza Flotilla interception and global response. Following the interception of a Gaza-bound flotilla by Israeli naval forces, a wave of international condemnation and protests has erupted. The global Summit flotillas, GSEF, attempting to deliver aid to Gaza, faced forceful intervention approximately 70 nautical miles off the coast, with subsequent vessels encountering similar actions. Over 443 individuals, including prominent climate activist Greta Thunberg, were detained, with reports of assaults using water cannons. Israel maintains the flotilla's actions constituted a provocation and a violation of its lawful naval blockade, asserting that the vessels approached an active combat zone. They claim all detained individuals are safe and in good health. The interception triggered widespread protests across numerous countries, including Spain, Italy, Colombia, Argentina, Greece, Germany, Tunisia, Turkey, Pakistan, Bolivia, and Malaysia. Italy's General Strike CGL, backed by trade unions, demonstrated solidarity with Gaza, criticizing the Italian government's inaction. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro expelled Israeli diplomats and terminated a free trade agreement, denouncing the interception as an international crime. Several vessels, including the Marinette, remain in contact, though one, the Makeno, is reported to have potentially entered Gaza's territorial waters. The GSF continues to advocate for the immediate release of the detained activists and the lifting of the blockade. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has urged Israel to immediately lift the blockade and facilitate humanitarian aid. The UK Foreign Office has expressed concern and contacted the families of British nationals involved. Legal teams associated with the flotilla are preparing further attempts to breach the blockade. The situation remains highly volatile, with ongoing international pressure on Israel to address the detention and the blockade of Gaza. The incident has amplified long-standing criticisms of Israel's blockade and raised concerns about international law and humanitarian access to the region. Recent developments across multiple news events, today's news cycle, has been marked by a series of significant events, including ongoing investigations following the Manchester synagogue attack, updates on the Israeli naval operation involving the global Sumud Flotilla, and the appointment of a new Archbishop of Canterbury. The BBC Verify team has been intensely focused on tracing the digital footprint of Jihad al-Shami, the individual identified as the suspect in the Manchester attack. Utilizing open-source intelligence, Verify has been meticulously examining social media profiles linked to him, seeking to understand his motives and activities. This investigation remains a primary priority for the BBC's verification efforts. Simultaneously, the Israeli military successfully intercepted the final vessel of the global Sumud Flotilla. Intelligence teams have subsequently tracked several of the detained ships to an Israeli naval base located in Ashdod. This action represents a key development in the ongoing situation surrounding the flotilla and the attempts to deliver aid to Gaza. Furthermore, Dame Sarah Mullally was officially appointed as the new Archbishop of Canterbury, a landmark event signifying a notable increase in the representation of women within the Church of England. Data indicates that women now constitute approximately 1/3 of all clergy members within the institution, reflecting a sustained effort to promote gender equality and diversity. The BBC Verify Live team will continue its comprehensive coverage of the Manchester synagogue attack, extending its reporting across the main live page and throughout the weekend. The team plans to return with further updates on Monday morning, providing ongoing analysis and developments related to this critical situation. These diverse events underscore the importance of continuous monitoring and verification across a range of global concerns. Russia's growing threat in space. The United Kingdom is facing a significant and escalating threat from Russia's counter-space activities, according to top military officials. General Paul Tedman, head of the UK Space Command, revealed that Russia has been targeting UK military satellites on a weekly basis, primarily through jamming attempts and observation using payloads on board their own satellites. This activity has intensified since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The UK currently operates half a dozen dedicated military satellites, including the Modi's first wholly owned Earth observation satellite, Taichi. However, the combined Russian and Chinese satellite fleet has increased by 70% over the past decade, presenting a substantial challenge. RAF Fylingdales, a key Cold War-era ballistic missile early warning system located in North Yorkshire, remains vital for detecting missile launches globally. The base, now housing a 30-meter pyramid structure, relies heavily on U.S. satellites and sensors for comprehensive surveillance. General Tedman emphasized the increasing congestion in space, with approximately 45,000 objects orbiting Earth, including around 9,000 satellites, and projected launches increasing to 300 this year. The UK is responding to this threat with increased investment, committing $1 billion into integrated air and missile defense, and planning to test sensors for laser threats, which China and Russia have developed. Despite these efforts, the UK's space defense budget remains relatively small, representing only 1% of its overall defense budget, compared to France's 3% and the US's 5%. Russia has been regularly firing short-range ballistic missiles into Ukraine, with launches observed almost daily from locations that remain undisclosed. The UK's reliance on US satellites and sensors highlights the interconnected nature of modern defense. The continued operation of RAF Fylingdales is a crucial element in safeguarding the UK from this evolving space-based threat. The increasing volume of missile launches globally, exceeding 4,000 in 2024, underscores the urgency of the situation. The UK government is taking steps to bolster its space and missile defense capabilities, recognizing space's critical role in national security and its dependence on space-based assets. Trump's security pledge to Qatar, a region-shaking move. President Donald Trump's recent executive order pledging U.S. military protection to Qatar represents a significant and potentially destabilizing shift in Middle Eastern geopolitics. The order, viewed as an unprecedented security alliance, mirrors aspects of the NATO structure, generating both excitement and considerable concern. It effectively elevates Qatar's status, transforming it into a key diplomatic crossroads, particularly in mediating the Israel-Hamas conflict. The move is driven by anxieties within Gulf Arab states regarding the perceived unreliability of the U.S. security umbrella, especially following Iran's attacks on Qatar's nuclear sites and Israel's escalating military actions. The order's timing is strategic, coinciding with Hamas's review of Trump's proposed Gaza peace plan, further cementing Doha's role as a central negotiation hub. Former U.S. Ambassador Dan Shapiro suggests the pledge is contingent on Qatar securing ayis from Hamas or expelling them if they refuse. Israel, through Haaretz, interprets the move as granting immunity to Hamas leadership residing in Qatar, despite warnings from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Despite Trump's assertion, the executive order bypasses Congress, raising legal questions and potential challenges from Democrats. Concerns extend to the Trump family's business dealings with Qatar, specifically the Trump Organization's luxury golf resort project, fueling accusations of a conflict of interest. The White House denies these allegations. Furthermore, the provision of a Qatari-donated 747 jetliner for Air Force One is also under scrutiny. Analysts, including Firas Maksad of Eurasia Group, believe the move is crucial for reassuring Qatar and other Gulf allies, prompting expectations that Saudi Arabia might seek a similar commitment. However, the order's potential legal vulnerabilities and the controversy surrounding Trump's business relationships contribute to uncertainty. The move is being viewed as a calculated risk, potentially reshaping regional alliances and demanding careful consideration of its long-term implications. The situation is further complicated by the potential for a future president to reverse or modify the order, adding another layer of complexity to this dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy. French authorities charge captain of Russian Shadow Fleet tanker. French authorities have formally charged the captain of the oil tanker, the Boracay, linked to Russia's Shadow Fleet, of vessels designed to circumvent Western sanctions. The captain, a Chinese national, faces charges of refusing to comply with instructions from the French Navy and failing to provide a coherent explanation regarding the ship's nationality. This arrest follows a boarding operation by French soldiers after the Boracay was identified as being on a list of vessels subject to EU sanctions for carrying Russian oil exports. Russian President Vladimir Putin condemned the action as piracy. The Boracay, currently registered in Benin and previously operating under multiple flags, was intercepted off the coast of Denmark following the sighting of unidentified drones that temporarily closed several airports. The ship departed from the Russian port of Primorsk on September 20th and navigated through the Baltic Sea and English Channel, with a planned arrival in Vadanar, India, scheduled for October 20th. The detention stems from concerns about the vessel's involvement in the drone incursions into Danish airspace last week, which prompted airport closures. While Danish authorities have found no evidence of Russian involvement, the incident has heightened tensions. Several other European nations, including Poland, Estonia, and Romania, have also reported airspace violations, though Russia denies any deliberate actions. The Shadow Fleet concept refers to a network of tankers, often registered in countries outside of Western nations, utilized by Russia to evade sanctions imposed in response to its invasion of Ukraine. Estimates suggest this fleet could encompass between 600 and 1,000 ships. The Boracay's prior detention earlier this year by Estonian authorities for sailing without a valid flag highlights the challenges Western nations face in tracking and controlling this clandestine network. The investigation continues, and the connection between the Boracay and the drone incident remains a key area of inquiry. India and China resumed direct flights following a 5-year ban, after a 5-year hiatus stemming from deadly troop clashes along their disputed Himalayan border. India and China are set to resume direct flights between Kolkata and Guangzhou, commencing on October 26. This move, announced by Indigo, India's largest budget airline, represents a significant step towards normalizing bilateral relations between the two nations. The resumption of flights is being viewed as a key element in facilitating people-to-people contact and contributing to the gradual normalization of exchanges following a period of strained ties. The initial cessation of direct flights occurred in 2020 following a fatal confrontation in the Galwan River Valley, resulting in the deaths of at least 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese soldiers, the first such casualty since 1975. Over the past year, Beijing and Delhi have engaged in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions, including agreements on patrolling arrangements along the border. Recent developments have seen China allowing Indian pilgrims access to religious sites within the Tibet Autonomous Region and India restarting visa services for Chinese tourists. Furthermore, discussions have been ongoing to establish border trade through designated passes. The situation has been further complicated by India's trade disputes with the United States, particularly under President Trump's tariffs, which has arguably incentivized Delhi to strengthen its relationship with Beijing. A pivotal moment occurred in August when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi declared that India and China should view each other as partners rather than adversaries. Subsequently, Chinese Ambassador to India Su Feihong criticized the U.S., labeling it a bully for its tariffs. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization SU Summit, where he met with President Xi Jinping, solidified the commitment to normalizing relations. This latest development underscores a strategic shift in the geopolitical landscape of the region, marking a tentative but crucial step towards rebuilding trust and cooperation between the two Asian giants. The move is expected to have significant implications for trade, tourism, and diplomatic relations. Madagascar protests, youth-led uprising challenges President Rajoelina's rule. Widespread protests across Madagascar, spearheaded by youth movement Gen Z Mada, are challenging President Andry Rajoelina's leadership amid chronic power shortages, economic hardship, and contested election results. The unrest, involving over 100 injuries and at least 22 deaths, disputed by the government, began with public outrage over prolonged blackouts and detention of city politicians planning a peaceful demonstration. Gen Z Mada, utilizing social media platforms like Facebook and TikTok, mobilized a broad coalition including labor unions, civil society groups, and opposition leaders, including former presidents Mark Ravalomanana and Saitini Randriana Saloniaco. The demonstrators demand Rajoelina's resignation, citing his responsibility for deteriorating living conditions, widespread corruption within the state-owned utility Jarama, and the lack of economic opportunities for young people. They are also calling for the dissolution of the Election Commission and the country's top court, reflecting concerns about the legitimacy of the 2018 and 2023 elections. The government's response has involved deploying security forces, utilizing tear gas and water cannons, and imposing a curfew in Antananarivo. President Rajoelina has accused protesters of being manipulated by foreign forces seeking to instigate a coup. Despite initial attempts at dialogue and pledges of World Bank funding, the protests have intensified, fueled by deep-seated frustrations and a perception of government inaction. Madagascar, one of the world's poorest nations with 75% of its population living below the poverty line and limited electricity access, is experiencing significant economic and social challenges. The unrest highlights the country's vulnerability to political instability and underscores the critical role of youth engagement in shaping its future. Analysts warn that a continued reliance on force by the government could exacerbate tensions and lead to further instability, while the military's potential refusal to suppress protests represents a crucial tipping point. The country's history of uprisings since independence further complicates the situation, with previous protests leading to regime changes. The situation remains volatile, with the future of Madagascar's political landscape uncertain. Kenyan activists abducted in Uganda, rising concerns over state repression. Two Kenyan human rights activists, Bob Nanjagi and Nicholas Oyo, have gone missing in Uganda following their abduction by armed men while attending an opposition leader Bobi Wine's campaign event. Bobi Wine, a presidential candidate challenging President Yoweri Museveni, strongly condemned the abduction, describing it as a mafia-style operation targeting individuals associated with his campaign. The activists were reportedly picked up at a petrol station and driven to an unknown location. The incident has triggered widespread condemnation from Kenyan rights organizations, including the Law Society of Kenya, Amnesty International Kenya, and Vocal Africa, who view it as part of a pattern of abductions and enforced disappearances. They have demanded the Ugandan authorities disclose the activists' whereabouts and ensure their safety. Ugandan police spokesman Kituma Rusok denied any involvement, stating the activists were not in police custody. Army spokesperson Felix Kulayiji, while acknowledging the allegations, requested proof and implicated security operatives. The activists' disappearances mirror previous incidents involving opposition figures across East Africa. Bob Nanjagi was previously abducted in Kenya last year, remaining missing for over a month before being released after a court order. He described harrowing conditions of isolation and denied food. Witnesses reported 4 armed men forcibly taking the activists into a vehicle. The activists had traveled to Uganda with some Ugandans before linking up with Bobi Wine's campaign. These cases have raised serious concerns about potential collaboration between East African governments to suppress dissent. Earlier this year, Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi and his Ugandan counterpart Agatha Achaher were detained in Tanzania and held incommunicado, alleging brutal mistreatment including sexual torture, allegations dismissed by Tanzanian police as hearsay. Last year, another Ugandan opposition figure, Kitsa Besigye, mysteriously disappeared in Nairobi before resurfacing in a military court in Uganda facing treason charges. The overall situation highlights a troubling trend of state-sponsored intimidation and the vulnerability of political activists in the region. Ladakh unrest, a region gripped by discontent and violence. Recent events in Ladakh have culminated in deadly violence and widespread unrest, stemming from years of perceived broken promises and growing frustration among residents. The region, a popular tourist destination nestled in the Himalayas and sharing borders with China and Pakistan, has experienced escalating tensions fueled by the revocation of Article 370 in 2019, which stripped the former state of Jammu and Kashmir of its special status. The unrest began with peaceful protests led by activists Sonam Wangchuk and others demanding statehood, job quotas, and special status for Ladakh. Thousands gathered in public parks to support the movement, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Violence erupted, resulting in injuries and the torching of a BJP office. Police responded with force, including the use of firearms, a claim disputed by protesters. A magistrate is currently investigating the events. Authorities have imposed restrictions and urged vigilance against anti-social and anti-national elements. Political and defense experts caution that escalation poses significant risks to India's national security, particularly given Ladakh's proximity to China and Pakistan. The demographic shift caused by the removal of Article 370, allowing non-residents to purchase land, has further exacerbated tensions. Residents feel marginalized and accuse the government of neglecting their concerns regarding land, jobs, and cultural identity. The region's diverse population, comprised of Muslims and Buddhists with distinct historical demands for separate regions, is deeply affected. The protests highlight the complex interplay of historical grievances, political maneuvering, and demographic changes within Ladakh. The situation is further complicated by the region's strategic importance and its sensitive border locations. The government has deployed paramilitary troops to maintain order, but the underlying issues of mistrust and unmet expectations remain unresolved, suggesting a challenging path towards reconciliation. The ongoing unrest underscores the fragility of the region's stability and the urgent need for dialogue and genuine engagement with the local population. Cuba's tourism sector faces persistent challenges amidst economic crisis. Despite optimistic pronouncements from Cuban tourism Minister Juan Carlos Garcia Granda, the nation's tourism industry remains significantly impacted by a complex web of economic and political factors. The sector, traditionally Cuba's primary source of foreign currency, has struggled to recover fully following the COVID-19 pandemic and intensified U.S. sanctions implemented during the Trump administration. Granda asserts that tourism is alive and kicking, projecting improved statistics for the second quarter of 2024, attributing a halt to the decline to the industry's resilience. However, he firmly believes U.S. restrictions, encompassing a total of 263 measures aimed at damaging the industry, are a primary obstacle, preventing a return to pre-pandemic visitor numbers, particularly citing the prohibition of U.S. cruise ships from Cuban ports. The U.S. actions, including repeated designations of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, have created further complications. Consequently, British tourists ineligible for EST authorization since January 2021 must navigate a longer visa process, deterring many potential visitors who previously traveled directly through Miami. This situation fuels frustration among Cubans who question the government's planning and the effectiveness of the Obama-era thaw. The Cuban government's ambitious hotel building program, particularly the construction of the towering Torre Hotel in Havana, is also a subject of considerable debate. While appreciated by some, including those employed in the hotels, it is viewed critically by many Cubans who argue the funds could have been better utilized addressing essential needs such as power outages. The project's architectural impact and perceived lack of integration with the surrounding urban environment contribute to the criticism. Ultimately, the situation highlights a fundamental question. Was the Cuban government misled by promises of sustained U.S. engagement, or is the instability of U.S. foreign policy the root cause of the tourism sector's ongoing struggles? The persistent challenges underscore the vulnerability of Cuba's economy to external political pressures and the need for diversified economic strategies. Riyadh Comedy Festival sparks human rights criticism. The Riyadh Comedy Festival, a large-scale event featuring prominent American comedians, has drawn significant backlash from human rights organizations due to its timing and the Saudi government's use of it as a tool for soft power. The festival, running from September 26 to October 9, showcases over 50 comedians including Kevin Hart, Dave Chappelle, Bill Burr, and Pete Davidson, and is organized by the Saudi Tourism Authority. Critics argue that the event glosses over ongoing human rights abuses within the kingdom. The festival's timing coinciding with the 7th anniversary of Jamal Khashoggi's assassination, a killing allegedly orchestrated by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has intensified the criticism. Comedians have expressed reservations, with Marc Maron famously questioning the connection between the festival's sponsors and the assassination. Many have cited America's own restrictions on free speech and the allure of substantial financial compensation. Several comedians received offers with stipulations prohibiting criticism of Saudi Arabia, the royal family, or religion. Despite these concerns, some performers, including Bill Burr, highlighted the apparent freedom of expression within the festival environment, noting the audience's lack of overtly hostile reactions. However, human rights advocates emphasize that Saudi Arabia remains an authoritarian state where critics face lengthy prison sentences. Sarah Lee Whitson, director of democracy for the Arab World Now, pointed out that while Saudis may have an opportunity to laugh, the comedian's participation is a contradiction to Jamal Khashoggi's motivations for fleeing to the United States and ultimately his assassination. Several journalists, including Saad al-Mahdi, remain imprisoned in Saudi Arabia, highlighting the continued suppression of dissent. The Saudi government's efforts to rehabilitate its image through cultural initiatives, such as the festival and investments in organizations like Penske Media and Uber, have been met with continued scrutiny. Christian Coates Ulrichsen notes that Saudi Arabia utilizes soft power, particularly through sports, to generate awareness of a perceived process of change. Human Rights Watch has criticized the festival for diverting attention from human rights violations. The situation is further complicated by the ongoing imprisonment of journalists and activists who exercise their right to free speech, underscoring the stark contrast between the festival's celebratory atmosphere and the reality of human rights conditions within the country. Japan's ruling party in crisis, a new leader's uncertain path. Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, is facing a severe crisis, marked by political instability and declining public trust. The country has experienced 4 prime ministers in 5 years, a reflection of the LDP's waning influence after 3 decades of continuous rule. The upcoming leadership election on Saturday will determine the next prime minister, a position currently precarious due to scandals, unpopularity, and a shift in voter sentiment. Key factors contributing to the LDP's downfall include the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2022, a funding scandal involving millions of dollars in undocumented political funds, and a surge in inflation impacting the cost of essential goods like rice. This has fueled public frustration and a desire for change. 3 candidates are vying for the leadership: veteran bureaucrat Sano Takechi, Agriculture Minister Shinjiro Koizumi, and Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi. Takechi, a conservative, seeks to return the party to its traditional values and potentially attract right-wing voters. Koizumi, the son of a former prime minister, represents a younger, more moderate approach, advocating for constitutional reform and allowing couples to use separate surnames. Hayashi, the most experienced candidate, is seen as a stabilizing force. Regardless of the winner, the LDP faces significant challenges. The party has lost its parliamentary majority, increasing the difficulty of enacting legislation and forming a stable government. The aging population and declining birth rate pose a major economic and social challenge, demanding innovative solutions. Managing relations with the United States, particularly under the Trump administration, and navigating regional tensions with China and South Korea remain critical priorities. Furthermore, internal divisions within the LDP between conservative and moderate factions could hamper governance. The party's ability to unite and address pressing issues, including inflation and demographic decline, will be crucial to its future. Experts suggest that securing a coalition government, potentially including opposition parties, will be necessary for the next leader to regain a parliamentary majority. The election outcome is considered uncertain, with no guarantee that the new leader can restore public confidence and steer Japan toward a stable and prosperous future. The LDP's success hinges on its ability to adapt to changing voter preferences and effectively address the nation's complex challenges. Trump administration declares armed conflict with drug cartels. President Donald Trump has officially declared a state of armed conflict with drug cartels, a move outlined in a notice provided to Congress. This determination classifies cartel members as unlawful combatants, enabling the Department of Defense to authorize military strikes, including at least 3 operations within the last month, resulting in 17 deaths. These strikes, primarily targeting suspected members of the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua, have been conducted in the Caribbean. The Pentagon's legal counsel and uniformed representatives briefed lawmakers on the justification, mirroring the written notice. The administration argues that the cartels' increased armament, organization, and violence, coupled with their transnational operations, constitute an armed attack against the United States. This classification allows for the treatment of these groups as legitimate targets, bypassing traditional due process protections. The legal shift is significant, potentially allowing for indefinite detention or lethal force against suspected narco-terrorists. However, this decision has drawn criticism, particularly from Senator Jack Reed, who asserts the administration lacks credible legal justification and evidence for these actions. He emphasizes that drug cartels should be addressed through law enforcement, not through unilateral military engagement. The administration's strategy involves deploying U.S. forces, including ships and aircraft, to prevent further casualties and threats. Despite the declared conflict, the scope of operations remains somewhat unclear, with one targeted vessel turning away from the U.S. before being struck. The decision underscores a shift in the administration's approach to combating drug trafficking, moving beyond traditional law enforcement methods. The administration's justification relies on Article 2 of the Constitution, allowing for military force in the national interest, but remains controversial due to the lack of congressional oversight and public transparency. Concerns have been raised regarding the potential for escalating conflict and the implications for legal and constitutional rights. Ex-hostage reflects on trauma and hope. Eli Sharabi, a former Israeli hostage held by Hamas during the 7th of October attacks, shares his harrowing experience and unwavering determination to rebuild his life. After a 491-day captivity, punctuated by starvation, abuse, and confinement within Hamas tunnels, Sharabi was released in February 2025, only to discover the tragic fate of his wife, Leanne, and their 3 daughters, Noaya, Yahel, and his brother Yossi, who had been killed. The ordeal began on October 7th when the Sharabi family sought refuge in a safe room in Kibbutz Be'eri, where they were brutally attacked. He was initially taken to a Gaza mosque and subjected to inhumane treatment, including being tied and chained. Sharabi's release was facilitated by U.S. President Donald Trump and the proposed peace plan, though he expresses deep concern that the deal is now faltering, placing the remaining 20 hostages at risk. He describes the agonizing moment of learning about his family's deaths during his release ceremony, highlighting the stark contrast between the joyous announcement and the devastating reality. He has since become a vocal advocate for the release of all hostages and met with President Trump to urge him to finalize the agreement. Throughout his captivity, Sharabi maintained a resolute focus on survival and the promise he made to his family. He endured extreme conditions, including a single meal of pita bread per day, and faced psychological torment. Despite the horrific circumstances, he refused to succumb to despair, driven by the memory of his loved ones. He has written a book detailing his experience to raise awareness. Sharabi's resilience has garnered widespread admiration, and he actively campaigns for the release of the remaining hostages. He acknowledges the immense suffering caused by the ongoing conflict and the risk it poses to those still held captive. He remains hopeful for a peaceful resolution and the return of all hostages, expressing his belief that war is awful. People are suffering from war, but we can't forget who started that, and who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. He is determined to honor his family's memory by living a full life, embracing the simple joys of existence, and refusing to be defined by his trauma.